Dr. Diane, welcome to Adulting with Autism.
Oh, thank you, April. I'm very much looking forward to having this conversation with you.
Now, for all my listeners out there that are new to you, tell them who you are and what you do.
I do a lot of things. So I am known actually as both the Libido Doc as well as the Lyme Doc. So I have two very different branches of what I do. One is helping end chronic disease and people that are suffering from a myriad of symptoms where they don't know what's wrong with them. And finally, they discover it's Lyme, mold, or another, say, dozen or 2 dozen root causes. So that's one side of me. And then another side of me is really helping people with relationships and really helping people have better communication, have better sex and intimacy, and really just fall deeper in love in their long term relationships. And it's one of these things too, April, that I see so commonly in health that we talk about water, we talk about nutrition, we talk about exercise, we talk about diet, lifestyle supplements, and it's great. All of these things are super essential, but the conversation around intimacy is really important. In fact, Harvard released a study recently, a long term longitudinal study that was for about 75 years long. And they found that the number one thing that impacted happiness and longevity was loneliness. And yet we're not really talking about that in the medical space yet. So a lot of the work I do is really bringing awareness to the importance of intimacy, to growing in deeper connection with our partner and why this is so important for a not only a healthy life but also a happy life.
Now, you've also dedicated your career to shame free, holistic conversations. What exactly is shame free meant in practice?
I love this question, right? And I love it because I have gotten some pushback on this question because when we're defining shame, when we're talking about shame as an emotion, I think what we need to remember is what are the purposes of emotions, right? And so when I'm bringing up shame and I'm talking about shame free, it's not to shame, right? So it's
Right.
not to say that shame in every scenario is bad. Shame has a level of like, wow, if I hurt somebody and if I feel a sense of shame around it, that shame is there as a flag to tell me I did something that feels harmful to another, that doesn't feel good. And that shame is like there so I can remember and I can learn from it so I don't hurt that person in the same sort of way. So that's what I will say around like the positive of emotions. The shame I'm talking about is a type of shame that we hold on to and we viciously think about and we circularly think about in a way that does not provide value. So, for example, when we're talking about intimacy and we're talking about shame free intimacy, what I'm talking about here specifically is really understanding what is going on in our psychology around intimacy and around our beliefs around intimacy. Because a lot of people have beliefs around intimacy having to look a certain way or it's bad. Right. And for many people, like even any sort of self pleasure, or some people exploring outside of a missionary position, having conversations around sex, maybe bringing in something novel like a sex toy into the relationship, maybe having desires for that, oftentimes people have a lot of shame around their sexuality. Now, again, if it's shame because there was harm, of another person, the shame was there to teach us something, great. But what we want to do is if it is there to teach us something, we want to extract whatever lesson was, need it to be learned, and then move past that to say anytime that we're in a state around like let's say somebody's like, I really want to try this new toy in our sex life. And if they're having shame around that, that shuts them down from usually bringing it up. Oftentimes it goes into like what we call in Jungian tradition, like shadow, where we don't talk about it, we don't admit it, and we kind of put it on this shelf like it's bad. And most of the things that we put on a shelf because of this shadow criteria actually get louder, right? They don't tend to get quieter. They tend to get louder. There are these voices inside of us. So I'm not saying that shame, like, just like I'm not like, I would never say this about anger or any emotion. Like, these emotions are flags. The thing that we want to do with any emotion, though, is learn from 'em, get the lesson, process the emotion and not live from that state of that emotion, just like we don't want to live from the state of fear, for example.
Now, I know a lot of autistic adults out there feel like they're thrown to the wolves around dating, consent, intimacy. From your perspective, like, what are the biggest gaps in the way we teach and don't teach about sex and relationships?
I mean, I think there's so many, April. There really are so many. And when we're talking about autism, we're talking about just the spectrum in general. I look at that and I look at these situations similar to, I think, what we see with anything and from like a health or a neurodivergent scenario where when we process information differently, oftentimes we're not taught around like, well, what does communication look like? What does touch look like? And this doesn't just apply for autistic or spectrum individuals. It includes them, of course, but it's much beyond that. That we're really taught that intimacy is very linear. It's taught that it's like intimacy largely is taught from like a hetero standpoint of penis and vagina sex, and even if somebody is hetero, and if somebody's in a hetero relationship, if it expands beyond that, the P and V sex, we're not even taught like what that is or how that could look or any of that. And then if somebody doesn't fall into the, heterosexual norms, then that's oftentimes not even talked about at all. But the biggest thing I feel like is sex is really thought of oftentimes as far as the education as female and male come together. They have intercourse. Oftentimes it lasts 5 to 7 minutes, which is actually the standard amount of time, that the most common statistical time that intercourse lasts. And that's largely what we're taught. We're taught, if we're lucky, we're taught about, STIs and condoms and safe sex and that sort of thing. But we're not really taught around, what does eroticism look like from female to male? What does eroticism look like from this health type to that health type? What does eroticism look like for somebody that is autistic, that is neurodivergent? We're not taught any of those things. And I think we're not really taught how to safely communicate with our partner in a way that we are kind of advocating for ourselves, and have our partner understand that just because we don't fall into this standard textbook thing that all of us are taught doesn't mean we're weird, doesn't mean we're anything. It just means that we're human, and we all have way, like, even in the, heteronormative, like, person, there's still way more variety even that person is going to experience in their intimate life than is often talked about. So I think we're just not normalizing the conversation enough, where so many people are having desires or fears or guilt or whatever it is, and we're not taught that there's so much bio individuality around eroticism from one person to another, no matter what is going on with their health world. So we're not taught about the bio individuality. And therefore, if we fall out of what we think or we taught are the normative ways, then all of a sudden it oftentimes just like gets pushed under the rug. And we never wind up even bringing this up to, our preferences and our desires to our partner.
What are communication barriers that you see, and how can couples work with those barriers of interpreting? Because it gets real messy,
It
especially.
does. It does. Yeah, I'm sorry. Did I interrupt your question? Did you have one?
No.
Okay, okay. So, it's interesting when we look at studies and we look at studies on conflict. There are three threats to any conflict, and there's any conflict between individuals. And so the three threats are the threat to one person, the threat to the other person, and then the threat to like the we space, right? And so when we look at studies, most types of conflict are, the three threats are kind of equal, meaning, okay, well, if we're going to have a discussion around, well, I don't like how you clean the house or something like that. In bringing that up, there's the threat to myself, the threat to the other person, and the threat to the we space. They're all like 33% at risk. When it comes to intimacy, what's really interesting is, and this is what we see in studies, is that one of those three threats has the greatest risk. And the threat that has the greatest risk is the threat to the self. And so, what that means is if I'm going to enter into a conversation about intimacy, I am going to have a superior motive in this conversation versus other conversations to protect my ego. Now, that's always going to be there, right? We all have this subconscious driver to ego protect because we are living beings and that's part of life. But when it comes to sex, that kind of that old reptilian brain, that kind of autopilot survival brain kicks on in a different way. And so what that tends to mean is that if my partner brings something to me or I tend to bring my something to my partner around maybe something I want to do differently or how I want my intimate life or our intimate life to look different, that I'm going to be listening to everything he says from a am I safe perspective. He's going to be listening to everything I say from a is he safe perspective. And so when we're in that type of like fight or flight, adrenaline, safety type of scenario, we're not listening to really understand. We're listening to protect, which is a very, very different way of listening. So a lot of what I find when it comes to communication and intimacy is taking things that work in other scenarios and also applying them to intimacy. For example, I love the Gottmans. The Gottmans are, for anybody that doesn't know them, they're the amazing relationship coaches, a married couple. They've been in practice as far as teaching, I think for close to like 30 or 40 years now. It's been a long time. And they talk a lot about like ratios of how many times you need to say something positive before you're allowed, and hear my air quotes with the word allowed, to say something negative. And the idea with that is we almost want to build up this bank of hearing so many positive things before we introduce something negative so that we're making sure that we're not just like giving our partner all these things that they're doing wrong all the time, right? Well, then we take that and we apply this study, right? We apply these studies where it says we tend to ego protect even more when it comes to intimate conversations. So then what I gather out of that is in these conversations that are extra delicate, we want to make sure we are saying even more good things before we bring up something that needs to change. And so it's not, it's not rocket science as far as communication on these things. It's not, even really inventing the wheel. It's taking things that have been like proven and true and saying, how do we apply these same techniques to our intimate life? So, conversation around intimacy, well, first of all, is really hard for a lot of people because there's not a model for it oftentimes. Like, we don't see parents as like parents. You might see them navigate through conflict, but most parents, if they're talking about their intimate life, they're probably going to be doing that if they're even having a conversation at all behind closed doors and probably even not at all. So since it's not modeled, we do want to provide or we do want to have a little bit of grace around it, but we want to start these conversations knowing that, okay, there might be some awkwardness and being okay with it, knowing that we might tend to ego protect and just going into that knowing it and then starting any conversations largely with just saying positive things. So if we're going to start talking about our intimate lives for the first time, a few weeks, I would recommend a few weeks go by and the only thing you're bringing up about your intimate life is that very cool thing that you love that your partner did or used to do. Right? And be specific, it's not just like, "Oh, I love the way you kiss me." It's, "I love the way you kiss me when you pull me in and your lips softly graze mine and you hold there for a second and you look in my eyes and then you continue," right? Like the more specific, the more your partner knows that you're there and you're with them and you're present. But the idea of this is we want to build up that intimacy communication bank so that when we decide to go in and say, that other thing you're doing, well, I don't love that thing so much. And we have better language than that. I'm just simplifying it for this initial conversation. But we want to build so that when we do say something that we want to be different, that they've heard for weeks now, like, I'm a really good lover. I'm really good at this. My partner values my intimate life with them, right? And so when there's something that needs to be changed, it's already built on this foundation of I'm doing it right. And when there's that foundation, all of a sudden we can get out of our survival brain listening for, am I wrong? Am I messing up? And instead, it's much easier to switch into that brain of truly listening and saying, oh, this is my partner that wants to connect what is really underneath this and what is really going on with what they're trying to say.
Now, you worked with a lot of monogamous couples seeking like a deeper connection. That seems like to be the new buzzword, connection. What like patterns do you see in these relationships?
I think a lot of patterns are very similar to what I feel like people read online as normal. And there's a huge differentiation between the word normal and the word common. And they get really confused that just because something is common, we oftentimes associate that with normal, and they're not the same thing. So it is very common for people when they're together for a long time for their sex life to dwindle, for it to not be prioritized, for them to become roommates. It's very possible and common for sex to become boring, right? It's very common for the parts not to work the same way as they used to. It's very common for men to experience erectile dysfunction, for women to experience vaginal dryness, for them to feel so stressed from the days, from work, from kids, all the things that by the time they get home, all they can think about is just getting to the couch and watching a show after they put their kids to bed and falling asleep, right? All these things are very, very, very common. So it's common to think that sex is supposed to dwindle. It's common to think that intimacy is something that was hot in the new relationship energy side of things and isn't hot as we continue. But one of the things that initially started making me want to speak out about intimacy was after I had heard a talk by Richard Bandler, who's one of the co-founders of the brain retraining system called NLP, neuro linguistic programming. And in this particular lecture, he was explaining that when he first was engaged, that people were coming up to him and saying, that sex was going to get a lot worse when he got married, so he better enjoy it now. And I'm paraphrasing this, so I might not remember this, talk exactly, but it was something like this. And his response was, "Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So why would I practice something over and over and over again and get worse at it?" Right? And you think about that, right? We have, if we're in a monogamous relationship, we have one partner for decades, and this is our person, and this is our person that we're intimate with. Why does it get worse? And right, so the science of what happens there is all related to brain chemicals and dopamine and newness and excitement. And yes, that new relationship energy is not typically the same with time as it is in the beginning. But just because it's common that things dwindle down and they're not so fiery hot, again, is common. It does not have to be normal. It does not have to be the thing for people. And so one of the biggest things I really tell people is like it's all about bringing more notes to your musical instrument. So if we are playing guitar, like sex and guitar, they actually are related. And if we're playing guitar and we learn how to play guitar and we learn three chords, the C, the G, and the A. And when we're first playing these and we're getting new strumming patterns and we're super excited and maybe we get good enough to even like jam with your friends and it's a very exciting instrument to play. And maybe you know three notes, but you know these three notes well. You can play them all these different ways and it's so fun. And let's say 2 decades go by and you've been playing guitar, every week, multiple times a week if you're lucky. And all you still play is the A, the C, and the G. And so 2, 3 decades from this is gonna be like the most boring instrument ever because you're doing the exact same thing. You're looking at it the same way, you're experiencing the same way, all of that. Like left to our own devices without prioritizing, without saying, "Hey, my partner, my intimate life is such a value to me. It is such a high priority to me, just like kids, just like jobs, just like staying in shape for some people." That you're gonna put it to, at one of the things that's top on the list, and we put something as a priority, we give it time, we give it space, we give it energy. And oftentimes, like, what happens is because we kinda can set this relationship on autopilot, right? Just like
Yeah.
putting our guitar notes on autopilot, left to their own devices. If we don't start adding in A minor and E, and all the other types of sustain that, we can go on and on and on and on with the guitar analogy. If we don't start adding all these different notes, adding these different positions, adding these different places, adding different ways we're intimate with each other. And again, in monogamy, that's very, very possible to bring this excitement into monogamy. If we don't prioritize it, our partner just becomes the A, C, and G. And sex becomes not only boring, but pretty unmotivating because we only have three chords.
Now, how do neurodivergent traits like, we have that intense focus and routine dependence and social fatigue like shape intimacy over the years?
It's a great question. So I would definitely encourage everybody listening to go take my free quiz. So I'll tell you about my free quiz. So a lot of people have heard of love languages, right? So, like the love languages by Gary Chapman. We have libido codes as well. They're basically our intimate languages. And these intimate languages will shape your turn ons. They'll shape how you show up with your partner. And we see that some people really appreciate the structure. Now, this is the person that is going to get into oftentimes like, well, I want the smells to be different, like just right. I want the sound to be just right. I want the thing like, the pillows have to be here and this has to look this way and that has to look this way and the sound and all the things. And so you can find this quiz at libidoquiz.com. And what you'll learn when you like take this with your partner, I encourage people to take this together with their partners because just like with the love language book, oftentimes we find that we are somebody that has a different libido language. They have a different libido code than us. And so oftentimes we are missing their signs. So, for somebody that's a neurodivergent person that needs certain things, that's just your code. That's just, part of like your makeup. And the helpful thing in doing a quiz like this is for your a partner to understand that, like, oh, if you're somebody that you need things to look a certain way, if you need the structure, if you need things to look away in order for you to be able to be present, that's just part of your libido language. That's just part of how you see and interact with the world. And then when we can start to actually have our partners see that, and all of a sudden we can start to understand each other's languages. So maybe, if we have a neurodivergent person with somebody that's not, maybe the neurodivergent person starts to straighten the house in a certain way. And maybe they start to put on a certain song, a certain smell, and they're getting everything to look a certain way. Well, that's the cue for their partner that says, oh, they might actually be getting organized so that they can actually soften and actually be present with me. And instead of feeling like annoyed about certain behaviors, all of a sudden we can switch to say, that's what they're communicating to me, and we actually begin to understand the message and the information behind the behavior. And I know it's mostly a autism podcast that like people that are on the spectrum are listening to this, but even if you're listening and you are, say, with somebody that's autistic and you are not, it's a really helpful exercise no matter which side of the equation you are on here. Because really it's like anything when we're talking about neurodivergency, all we're really talking about is just different firing, neuronal firing in our brain. Like that's I'm oversimplifying it, obviously. There's a little more to it than that, but it's a lot of what we're talking about is just different ways the brain is interpreting the world and responding to the world. And so when we understand the code behind the brain and our partner understands the code behind the brain, we can then interact and support each other to say, oh, my partner, to get my partner in the mood, to help my partner get in the mood, I might start doing these types of activities that are going to help them relax, help them enjoy, and help them be more present so they can show up more fully and we can have this time together. So we learn with the libido code how to really be supportive of each other, to help turn each other on and off, and to not just say, well, that's a different language, so it's not important to me. We start to understand each other's languages more.
Okay, now that you said that, how do you help couples like with the mismatch libido without turning one partner in? It's not me, it's you.
Yeah, it's a great question, April. And desire mismatches, like back to your previous question, of like what comes up a lot with monogamous couples, desire mismatch is probably one of the top things that comes up. And desire mismatch is interesting too because it can change a lot, even the course of like a couple's together long enough. Oftentimes, it might be like earlier in the relationship, maybe the one partner has a stronger desire, and then it can flip. And later in the relationship, it could be the other. So it's a really good thing to learn how to work with because the longer we are together, the more it tends to cycle. So, one of the first things takes us back to what I was saying earlier in our conversation around intercourse, around it's very, very important that we broaden the definition, whether it's a hetero or homosexual relationship, we need to broaden the definition of sex beyond penis and vagina. And that's really important, right? Because when we are talking about desire mismatch, oftentimes I find that people are more on the same page than they realize. And so, an intro exercise I have people do is talk about why. Why is intimacy valuable and what does it provide? And so, I encourage people to do this like an exercise first on their own and then to talk about it. And typically, when people talk about it and they look at their list, it looks something like this: I enjoy pleasure. I feel more love. I feel more connected to you. I feel like I can let things go easier. It helps me feel less stressed. It just feels good. I feel a release. I can relax, like on and on and on and on, right? So stuff like this is typically what we hear. And when we actually look at the what behind the acts, right? Or the acts, when we look at the what and the why, we realize like, well, these are things most of us humans want. We want to feel more love. We want to feel more connection. We want to feel more closeness, right? We want to feel less stress and more relaxed. All of these things are actually oftentimes things that we are all looking for. So sometimes I can take the charge off of it when it just has like the 3 letter word that starts with X. I mean, starts with S, I mean, we have that 3 letter word. It can take the charge by being like, this is not just about sex. It is about all of these other things. And so that oftentimes can put us like closer to being on the same page and say, well, I want connection too, and I want love too. So, how else can we experience this? And that's when we take that as a concept and we broaden that definition to be more than just P and V, right? More than just penis and vagina sex to say, okay, well, can we experience this love and this closeness with cuddling? Can we experience this with erotic touch? Can we experience this with erotic massage? Can we experience this with oral sex? Can we experience with co masturbation? And we're actually looking for all the things that are intimate and all the ways that we can actually experience love, closeness, stress relief, all these types of things. And we might find that even if one of the two partners says like, okay, well, this is my favorite way, my access point of it, right? That can happen that if we start including all of these other ways to be intimate and to experiences, that oftentimes we can get closer to being kind of a match this way into getting each other's needs met than we might actually think. So a lot of it is really redefining what does this mean and what value does it provide? And then oftentimes too, we have to also look at other reasons desire could be low, right? So it's important to look at physical root causes. Are there hormonal imbalances? Is there too much stress? Are there circulatory imbalances? Are there thyroid imbalances? Are there other causes of inflammation in the body, which can all affect desire? We need to make sure that the conversations around, am I bored? Are we bringing novelty in? Are we finding ways to get the juices going? Do we understand that women's arousal is very different than men? For example, men, they get first, they have desire and then they get aroused. Women, this is another thing that is not classically taught in the textbook, first get aroused and then they get desire. So for men, what that means is so desires of the mind, right? Arousals of the body. So for men, desire comes first. And so for the man, he thinks about sex, it's like, oh wow, there's my lovely partner walking across the room. Aren't they beautiful? Yada yada. The mind then thinks about sex and then there's an erection. The body gets aroused, right? So the arousal follows the thought. For women, oftentimes women think they don't have desire, and men think oftentimes that they're female. If they're in a hetero relationship, they think their female partner has lost their desire because they're waiting for the mind to say, I'm horny, the mind to say, I'm aroused. Well, for women, with an exception of the new relationship energy, where there's all these other chemical cocktails, throwing things off. But once we're past that new relationship energy, arousal actually happens before desire. And so what that means is the woman feels sensations in her body most of the time before the mind says it's horny. And so for her, oftentimes, she needs a sensual massage. She needs a bath. She needs to dance. She needs to do yoga. She needs something that's going to make her feel the sensations in her body. And then 20 minutes of that. And then all of a sudden, then when she's in her body, she's feeling the sensations, then the mind will kick in. And, this is why many women, when they do start to engage in sex and intimacy, even if they don't feel like it and they just do it oftentimes out of like obligation, it's very common that women will say things like, well, I really wasn't in the mood. And we started doing it. And after a while, I started realizing, like, actually, I do kind of like this. And why don't we do it more often? Right. And that's oftentimes because of that arousal kicking in and that desire happening later. So, it's a long winded way of answering your question around desire mismatch, but there's so much to it. So, to kind of sum up, it's really redefining, why is this important? What does it solve? It's opening and expanding what sex is. So we have more to work with and more ways we can meet and not feel mismatched. And then it's looking at all these other, say, root causes of what does drive a libido and drives desire down, and seeing what else medically and emotionally and interrelationally need to be worked on, as well as understanding that difference between desire and arousal between the woman and man. So it's long-winded because there's so much to it, but it is a something that is very fixable, but we do have to prioritize our intimate life if we want to fix it.
So let's talk about consent because I know that can be a confusing conversation. And for neurodivergents, some of us take language face value. So how can we like teach consent and still, you know, be intimate with our partner without like a blank yes, no?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's like it is a tricky thing from a standpoint of like hard boundaries and wanting to be very clear with communication. Some people do well to have like a scale, a 1 to 10 scale, or like a cold, warm, lukewarm, hot, these types of things. So we can do certain things around like a scale, or like some people will use like red light, green light, right? So it's like red light, green light is okay, well, if it's green light, you can continue. If it's red light, you stop. So sometimes we can, like, in both in conversation ahead of time as well as in the intimate moments, use terminology like that. It is something though that I would really recommend that people, it's another example of like talking about these things prior to actually being intimate. It's the same thing as like bringing a new toy in, or trying, like, if you've only done missionary position for the past 10 years, well, you might find that it goes better if you talk to your partner about trying something else before, being in the big moment and then trying something, because it can be shocking, it can be surprising. And I find that true both for neurodivergent people as well as not, but especially for neurodivergent. So there's just like that clarity in going into these scenarios. So a lot of it is like conversations ahead of time around what feels good, around how to communicate, around what, is there room? Is there room and intimacy for, okay, this is the gray space, right? Is there room? Is there like a yellow light? Can you use a system like green, red, yellow? And if I say yellow, that means, okay, whatever you're doing is like, I'm real close to like this not being comfortable, but I'm willing to try. And, maybe for a neurodivergent, there's like less of the yellow word and it's way more green and red, but sometimes like a system like that. So there's language and there's something ahead of time that just says like, hey, okay, green means you're doing great. Green means continue. Green means I love it. Red means hard stop. This is not feeling good to me, all of that. But if we go into that with that clear communication, it can become more playful and can become just more, I think, a lot easier to respect each other because there is that conversation ahead of time.
Now, I know a lot of listeners out there struggle with like body image or feeling disconnected from their physical selves. Like, what practices do you suggest for like reconnecting?
It's a huge thing, and I actually, part 2 of my three-part book series just came out last month. It's, Want to Want It. So Want to Want It part 2 actually talks about some of this, and it's because Want to Want It part 2 is really all about, like, the personal root causes, which are largely how well do we know our body and how well do we feel comfortable in our body, and it's really interesting. Like in health and medicine, one of the things that I talk about a lot are these vicious cycles that we get into. And the vicious cycles are kind of like a chicken and egg scenario where, like, what came first? And so when it comes to body image, what's interesting is we see there's studies that have shown that having sex improves body image. But then body image imbalances will actually typically lead most people to not feeling like, well, I don't want to get naked. I don't feel comfortable with my own body. So I'm not going to let somebody else. And then we don't have sex, even though sex is the thing, one of the things that can actually help improve body image. So there's the vicious cycle. There's the what came first scenario. So anything, I mean, I tend to find anything that helps people get back into feeling the sensations of their body really, really helps. So this is like what helps people feel the sensations of their body are somatic things, right? So this is movement, this is yoga, this is dance, this is putting like lotion on and these sorts of things. And one of the things that I think is super important is stopping any negative self talk. And when we stop negative self talk, one of the things that's super important about that is not to, this comes back to our opening conversation on shame, not to like shame ourselves for shaming ourselves, right? So we want to be very careful where it's like, okay, well, if we're like, wow, I don't really like my thighs, and we're having all these thoughts around our thighs, if we catch ourselves having the thought, what I don't want people to do is like, well, I heard, oh, that was bad to have that thought. I heard this on a podcast. Now I'm bad for having that thought. That's like not helpful, right? That's not what we're saying at all. Every human out there, and I mean every human, has some thoughts about some parts of their lives that are not useful. And so I think some of it is partly destigmatizing, is like when we're talking about body image thoughts, all it is the same. It's just a different flavor of what every human has, which is some thoughts not being helpful. And that's really what it is. So I do think kind of one of the first steps is destigmatizing it and just naming it as like, okay, all these are, they're not bad, they're not wrong, they are not useful. Right? They're not useful. And so it just kind of really takes the shame and the blame and the black and white thinking around that, and instead saying, okay, well, what else can be useful? And if we're thinking about our body image and we're trying to really reframe our thoughts, one of the things that I have found to be the most useful for this is to start to slowly reframe our thoughts around various parts of our body in ways that are true, right? So if we're not feeling great about our thighs, we might not, our subconscious might not easily pick up something that moves us from like, oh God, I hate my thighs with all the cellulite all over them, right? That might be a hard jump to go from there to, I have the sexiest, most movie star looking thighs in the world. Our subconscious might be like, well, I don't really know about that. Right. So we need to move our thoughts more one thing at a time. Right. So, maybe it's something closer to like, wow, like my thighs are so good at getting me all like the muscles in my thighs are able to get me anywhere I need to go. How great for my thighs, right? Something like that, something where it's like, oh, this is a nicer thought, but I also believe this thought, right? And so then we're starting to move one day and one moment at a time to say, okay, well, maybe it's true that I hate my thighs, but what else is true? And so we start to ask ourselves, so a lot of spiritual teachers will say things like life is defined by the series of questions that we ask. So, or that we ask ourselves. So we can ask, if we ask our brain a question like, oh, what are all the ways that I am not sexy? our brain's going to do what it's supposed to do. It's going to answer the question for us. But if we ask our brain a different question and says like, what are all the ways I'm sexy and beautiful? Our brain's also going to look for those. So in a lot of rework, like what I have found with working with body image, a lot of it is feeling into the body and not just always being in the head can help. And then also when we get into the head and we're finding these thoughts to start to ask ourselves these questions, not by pushing those other thoughts away, not by making them bad, but by asking ourselves like, what else could be true about my body in a positive way? What ways can I be proud of my body? What ways can I feel sexy in my body? And it might start as like something as like, wow, I really, really have pretty feet. Maybe it starts as something like wherever it starts is perfect, but we're just doing this. And we have to remember that with body image, so much of this has been society and media and all the things. And you throw like, the Ozempic bodies now. And like, this is the latest thing, right? Where everybody, like, we have all these movie stars that look anorexic now. And it's like for years, we've been seeing this kind of stuff as humans around like what is sexy and what is normal. Point being, it's going to take because the nervous system is built in a way that nerves that fire together, wire together. So it will take time for the nervous system that is thinking that to think like positive thoughts and good thoughts about your body. It's going to take time. It's going to take practice. It's learning more notes on your guitar. You're not going to have those notes and those chords dialed overnight. So I just say that because it can be easy to be like, "Oh, wow, I've like worked on this, regularly for a month or two and been like, I'm still like not feeling great about my body." But if we've had those thoughts day in and day out for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years, well, then we need more time than just a month or two for that nervous system to wire together. So it's a lot of gentleness, it's a lot of practice. And it's a lot of not shaming ourselves for when we have those thoughts come on and we fall back in our old patterns and we don't get it right. It's just anytime we do notice, there's the opportunity to say, okay, well, today I'm going to take the opportunity to work on this again.
And my final question for you, where can people find you, your books, if they want to go deeper after this episode?
Yeah, I have great courses, you all. I have really great courses on how to grow deeper with your partner in monogamy. And so I call it the Hot Monogamy Society. You can show up and attend totally anonymously. You can change your name, you can change your face. You don't have to have any of that on there. So lots of opportunity to just learn and grow in the Hot Monogamy Society. The easiest way to get started with any of my work though is through I have a lot of free content out there. So if you go to havehotsex.com, see both some paid products on there as well as 8 different free products. So you can start with the free content. The libido code is on there. I have novelty checklists. I have, stuff to help with desire, so much more. So it's super easy. Havehotsex.com. And then these are the first 2 books of my series, Want to Want It Part 1, Want to Want It Part 2. These also go deep into a lot of these concepts, and you can find those on Amazon as well as pretty much every major online distributor sells them. So that you can find at wanttowantit.com. But just for ease, just start at havehotsex.com, and that will direct you to all of my amazing work.
Dr. Diane, thank you so much for coming onto my podcast.
Thank you, April. Thank you, everybody, for being willing to listen to this very taboo topic and to expand your world with yourself and your partner. And please do reach out if I can be of any service to you.